got Mark Emery, our principal trumpet, calling in from Navy, Mass. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Great to be here, Margot. Thanks for having me.
So what was a typical work day like for you back before the pandemic?
Well, before the pandemic, I would say that one similarity between before and now would be that, and probably similar to many of my colleagues in the Vermont Symphony, for instance, weeks could be very different.
Mm-hmm.
A week where I have 3 days off, and then an opera at the end of the week, or starting rehearsal on something, into a week where I've got 15 to 16 hour days trying to capture teaching and other things like that. So I kind of think in terms of, I know it sounds goofy to say, but eating my P's, P-E-A-S, which is performance, education, and being a scholar. And then also, I'm blanking on the A at the moment, but I had it all set for myself. But the point is,
and
being a scholar. Administration. So because I'm very often administering gigs also, even so, like many of my colleagues, pre-pandemic, I could have been at an opera checking my phone to make sure that a graduation ceremony that I was in charge of running music for is going smoothly, right at the same time that I had to meet a student after that. So in some ways, before the pandemic, it was just kind of like what a typical freelance musician life is like, that I believe tends to be made up of parts of those four elements that I almost remembered in their totality.
So what's a typical day like for you now? Do you have a new acronym, or I see you have a cat back there.
Yeah, Kitty knows whenever she's the real star of the family here, but really the acronym is the same. It's just things have changed forms. I feel like obviously playing trumpet is something you do because you enjoy mixing your sound with other people. And so I'm certainly missing that part of it. It feels this is a very strange time, but oddly enough, musicians tend to be resourceful. Art tends to be something that's somewhat recession proof. People want beauty in art when things are going great, and then people want to hear the blues when things are going poorly or tough times. So I'm finding more than anything that my days are stretched for me with regard to learning technology and learning methods and ways to basically bring those four, the PEAS acronym, to fruition for myself. So during the pandemic right now, I tend to have very long days that are a mix between trying to troubleshoot new things on computers and video editing and things I never thought I'd be looking up, to coming up with, to the joy of coming up with great ideas with colleagues about little ways to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very different assertion of those same four elements, I feel like, post-pandemic.
So back before all this hit, I'm sure you had a variety of gigs and things going on, and your lifestyle is probably pretty unfamiliar to a lot of people. So what's something that you would want people to know that they might not realize about being a professional trumpet player?
Well, one thing I was thinking about that question. I think it may be curious to some people to hear a couple things about trumpet in particular, which and works with any brass instrument, which is that really it's a resonator. From a technical standpoint, to call the trumpet an instrument, it's not a complete musical instrument. And the example I use with students is you could drop a cello and accidentally play a note if something hit one of those strings. And I'm not calling cello easy by a second, but if you drop a trumpet, no sound is going to come out. So I think that compared to certain other instruments, we have a certain amount of daily work that has to be done just to maintain general physicality to hopefully play the instrument well. So I think that would be one thing that if any of you poor people out there live in a building with a trumpet player, have a little mercy, because some of the stuff you hear long tones, very rudimentary exercises are just things that it's like the guy that walks the or the gal or guy that walks the high wire act at a circus. They have a certain amount of what they're doing is just maintaining a body that's capable of doing that. So I think that's one thing. And then another thing I thought that was sort of interesting in regards to your question is that a lot of people may not realize is as brass players, we have the equivalent. I grew up in the Northwest, and in the Northwest, there's salmon runs and smelt runs, and these are things of the news. You know, the smelt started running, and they're all down the stream. Well, brass players have a gig run called graduation season, and it happens in these weeks, kind of last week into this week and the next week, where colleges all through New England hire brass groups to play at their graduation ceremonies. And so that is just one little odd pocket of kind of what had become dependable income for brass players. And kind of we term the phrase graduation season. How's your graduation season? Oh, I'm booked solid, or I don't have any, that kind of a thing. And so that's been an interesting thing to, those jobs on my end are some among a list that fell away really without anybody even emailing about it. I don't know if you know what I mean, but it's kind of like the opera companies and the Vermont Symphony and these groups that you regularly play with, you expect to hear some word about how they're dealing with the pandemic and things like that. But the graduation run for brass players, at least from where I sit, kind of just withered away without much of a word, which is understandable. These colleges have more than enough to think about, but it's just a little oddity that is unique to trumpet players and to brass players in general. So added little loss that we're feeling right about this time of year, both socially. For me, I love to drive up into New Hampshire and Vermont, things like that. And so I'm missing that feeling of the initial part of spring as it pertains to gigs that I would normally be playing.
So speaking of gigs, what's the weirdest gig you've ever played?
Well, the weirdest, one that came to mind in terms of just being very unusual is that I've been involved in more than one performance with several Vermont Symphony colleagues, like 3 or 4 other people from the orchestra, in playing for the Red Sox World Series ceremony of all things, or those games when the Boston Pops brass would kind of fold us in to boost up their ranks to make sound basically in Fenway Park. And so I was thinking through like my own inner picture album. Definitely those times stuck out as kind of unusual, just that wow, here's Taka, our tuba player, Gabe Langfer, our bass trombone player at that time, Greg Spiridopoulos, who was in the trombone section, John Fietta, so many people that had this odd connection to Vermont. But I'd probably have to say my number one weirdest gig when it comes to Vermont Symphony especially, and it probably tops the list in general, is that one year we did a Halloween brass quintet concert. And I had picked this outfit, this costume that to me was just hilarious, that essentially made it look like I was riding piggyback on a little old lady's back. And so you got to I'm talking Halloween costumes here. So, yeah, already enter into the world of weird and then you can get there. But basically it was an optical illusion where it looked like, like my legs coming out the bottom of this dress were this little granny's legs and I'm on her back. Well, the one thing I didn't think about was playing the trumpet with that costume on. And so we're up in Vermont and some other stuff went on with a banana costume that is just too much to get into here. But suffice to say, there have been enough just hilarious things around this concert coming together that by the time I got out on stage and was trying to hold my trumpet in a way that would, not interrupt this head that was part of my costume, was definitely one of the weirdest hours that I spent playing trumpet. Like so many things, it also kind of engendered some authentic funny moments, and it, you know, made it a real thing. But I learned a key lesson, which is to picture playing your instrument before you buy a costume, and I've carried that with me ever since.
That's why you got to bring your trumpet to the store when you try stuff
Yeah,
out.
that may be an important part.
It
Absolutely.
won't be weird at all to do that.
Yeah.
So I have one last question for you. What's your favorite Ben and Jerry's flavor?
Well, I'm a big fan of Cherry Garcia, and I'm a big fan of Ben and Jerry and all that they do, both in Vermont and nationally. But I'm kind of a boring answer in the end. I think at the end of the day, I'm a peanut butter cup guy. I love anything that has little shots of rich peanut butter in it. It's over. And if I buy a pint with the best of intentions to save part of it for the next day, it very rarely happens. So I won't tell how many times I've done that during the pandemic closures at this point, but I'm a big fan of Ben and Jerry's. Probably peanut butter cup, number one.
I have a feeling you're not the only one who has finished pints quickly during.
Yeah, I think, in fact, we need to redefine the pint, I think, after this pandemic. I think it's, when it comes to ice cream anyway, and just
make a bigger one, or
call it a reasonable helping. Exactly, something like that.
All right, well, thanks for chatting with me, Mark.
Thanks for having me in.